Okay, are we on?
I just started it.
Okay.
Okay, now.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I never am sure when YouTube joins. So, we're on For God, the spiritual talks of Mahapurush Swami Shivananda. And we're on page 28, 29. 28. The first paragraph at the top of the page. One day, Sri Ramakrishna said, "Well, so many people come here, I seldom ask anyone about his home and family connections or desire to know anything about these. When I first met you, I felt that you belonged here, that I would like to know the particulars of your home, parents, and the like. Can you tell me why? Where is your home and what is your father's name?" In reply, I told him that I came from Baraset, and my father's name was Ram Kanai Ghoshal. Hearing this, the master said, "Indeed, you are the son of Ram Kanai Ghoshal? Now I understand why the mother aroused in me this desire for information about your home. I know your father very well. He is the attorney to Rani Rasmani's estate. The Rani and her family think highly of your father, and whenever he happens to visit the garden at Dakshineshwar, they do everything to make him comfortable, arranging carefully for his residence, meals, servants, and the like. He is certainly a highly developed sadhaka. A sadhaka is a spiritual aspirant. Whenever he came here after having his bath in the Ganga and putting on a red silk garment, he would enter the mother's temple. He would look like a veritable Bhairava, celestial attendant of Shiva. He was tall, stout, and fair complexioned, and his chest was always red. He meditated long at the mother's temple. He would have with him a musician who would sit behind him singing many songs symbolically describing the human body and its nerve centers, and also songs about the Mother Kali. Your father would be absorbed in meditation, tears running down streaming down his cheeks. After meditation, he left the temple. As he left the temple, his face would be flushed with spiritual emotions, and nobody dared approach him. I was at the time suffering from an unbearable burning sensation all over my body. After meeting your father, I said, 'Well, you are a devotee of the mother, and so am I. I also have a little meditation, but can you tell me why I have such a burning sensation all over my body? Look, the burning sensation is so intense that the hairs of my body have been burnt. This burning sensation is sometimes excruciating. Your father recommended that I wear an amulet bearing the name of my chosen deity. Strange as it may seem, with the wearing of this amulet, the burning sensation diminished at once. Would you ask your father to come and see me?' In those days, I used to live in Calcutta, visiting home occasionally. My father was very much pleased when I told him about Sri Ramakrishna, and he came to see the master once. On another occasion, the master said, 'Your father's spiritual practices were attended with some desire for worldly objects. As a result of his spiritual practices, he amassed plenty of wealth and also spent it nobly.' In connection with his childhood, Mahapurushji said, 'I recall little of the days when I was very young, but I do remember well that my father used to support many in his home. My mother would do the cooking for the family and serve the meals. She was fond of feeding people. In those days, my father was in a position to engage cooks and servants, but my mother would not allow that. She used to do almost all the housework herself. She was an ideal woman, very simple in her ways. Seeing her work, hard, my father would be pained and express sympathy. To that she would say, "To be able to feed people is a great blessing. They are all my children." When I was 9 years old, my mother passed away. It was her custom to wear a heavy sari with a wide red border. Other than this, I don't remember much. My uncle used to say that my mother would not ask for anything, not even her own clothes. In the course of time, as a result of my frequent visits to the Master, I made up my mind to give up all connection with the world and went to say goodbye to my father. He burst into tears, which began to trickle down his cheeks. We had a chapel. He asked me to salute the deity in the chapel and then blessed me. Placing his hand on my head, he said, "May you realize God." I myself tried hard to renounce the world and to realize him, but failed. Therefore I bless you that you may attain to God. I repeated this to the Master. He was very pleased to hear it and said, "It is very well that it has happened so." Monk. In these days, parents of this type are very rare. It would be in no sense an exaggeration to say that they are almost non-existent. Swami. Yes, you are right. My father was of that type because he had undergone some spiritual practice. Although he had a sincere longing to realize God, the embodiment of truth, he didn't succeed in his attempt. Besides, he had acquired a lot of experience of the world. That is why he could let me go so easily. Swami Shivananda was having his supper in the evening. In connection with the eating habits of the Master, a monk asked, "Maharaj, is it true that the Master's hands were so very soft that one day while breaking a luchi, thin fried bread, he cut his finger?" Swami, yes, his hands were very tender, but why speak of just his hands? His entire body was so. Don't you know that there is a kind of luchi with a hard crust? It was that kind of luchi which cut his finger. Someone inquired as to the quantity of food the Master would eat at night. To this, Swami Shivananda, pointing to the luchi on his plate, replied, "At night, he would perhaps eat 1 or at most 2 small luchis like this with a little porridge. Because he could not digest milk by itself, they would add water and cook it with cream of wheat, making a sort of pudding. He would take a little of it. In the cupboard there would be sweets made of fresh cheese. When hungry, he would eat 1 or 2 pieces of them, and perhaps half of 1 piece, giving the rest to others who were there. His ways were like that of a child. It was as if he were a child himself." After supper, when Swami Shivananda was seated in his room smoking, a monk asked, "Maharaj, during the Master's last illness, you, Swamiji, and Swami Abhedananda went to Bodh Gaya without letting the Master know anything about it. After your return from that pilgrimage, did the Master say anything to you?" Swami, yes, of course he said something. Moving a finger in a circle and shaking this thumb, he said, no spirituality anywhere. Then pointing to himself, he said, "This time, all is here. You may roam wherever you please, but you will not find anything anywhere. Here, all the doors are open." And now we're on chapter 11, or maybe 2, I'm not sure. 11. Place, Sri Ramakrishna Ashram, Bombay, January 28, 1927. At night, After supper, Swami Shivananda was seated in his room in the Sri Ramakrishna ashram at Bombay. Most of the monks and novices of the ashram were present. One monk said, "Maharaj, we have heard that the Master used to say, 'This is the last birth of those who would come here.' Did you yourself ever hear him say it?" Mahapurushji remained silent for a while and then replied, "Why, it has been mentioned in the books that have been written about him." Monk, what is the meaning of this saying of the Master? Does it refer to only those who had seen the Master and had attained devotion and faith through his grace? Or does it mean that this is the last birth of whoever has reverence for him? Swami, his words meant both. Whoever has deep regard for him is sincerely devoted to him and has surrendered himself to him, whether he has seen him in the flesh or not, will attain liberation and not be reborn. But self-surrender there must be. Monk, Maharaj, will those also be free who have taken refuge in him and have joined this order? Swami, yes, of course. But true liberation calls for complete self-dedication, even to belong in his fold. Is it a mean fortune? Monk, why? We don't seem to be making much headway or progress. Swami, my child, what you have done so far and what you are doing now is not negligible. Without his grace, even that would have been impossible. How gracious is the Master to you. Not for nothing has he snatched you away from your parents and made you renounce hearth and home. It is because he has been unusually gracious that he has brought you to the fold and given you the opportunity to attain the summum bonum of life. Monk, but Maharaj, we do not feel that the works we are engaged in have been very conducive to the development of the spirit of renunciation and dispassion. Swami, whatever you are doing here is certainly his work, and you are doing it all for his pleasure. You are not actuated by any selfish worldly desire. These activities of yours will undoubtedly foster a spirit of renunciation and dispassion. Don't think that a life of mendicancy in Rishikesh alone will give you dispassion. For shame. You are certainly on the right track. At present, you may not have this consciousness, but in the fullness of time, it will grow and you will be established in it. You will realize that everything is his and that you have nothing to regard as your own. Monk, Maharaj, we don't seem to have that realization. One cannot know peace unless there is total destruction of the ego in deep meditation. We hardly have good meditation. Swami, everything will come in good time, my child. Believe me when I say this. 12. Place, Sri Ramakrishna Ashram, Bombay. Time, January 29th. Next day. In the evening after supper, the monks and the novices of the Sri Ramakrishna Ashram at Bombay were assembled before Swami Shivananda to avail themselves of the benefit of his holy company. There was silence in the room. The conversation turned upon Swami Vivekananda. The Swami said, Swamiji stayed for a long time at the home of Chavildas here in Bombay. It was then that he visited many places in this part of the country. Chavildas belonged to the Arya Samaj and was against the worship of God with forms. He had much discussion with Swamiji concerning it. One day he said to Swamiji, Well, Swamiji, You say that worship of God with forms, idol worship, and such other doctrines are true. If you can prove these doctrines by arguments quoted from the Vedas, I shall leave the Arya Samaj, I promise you. Swamiji replied emphatically, yes, surely I can do that. He began explaining the Hindu doctrine of image worship and such other doctrines in the light of the Vedas until Chavildas was convinced. Chavildas made good his promise by leaving the Arya Samaj. Swamiji was such a genius, he could do that. It was at this time that Swamiji visited Pune, Malabar, and other places. Usually he avoided traveling by train, but when he took the train, he would travel first class. Ordinarily, he did not accept money from anyone, but if a person insisted on giving him something, he would say, "You may buy me a first-class train ticket if you wish." Because of his weak stomach, he had to have the facilities of a laboratory, which were available in the first-class compartment. Once he was going to Limdi, being invited by the Thakur Sahib. Plainly dressed, he was resting on a bench in a first-class compartment when some distinguished passengers entered there by another door. Finding a sannyasin occupying an entire bench, they became much annoyed and gave vent to their feelings in English. It is these sannyasins who have been responsible for the downfall of India, they said. Swamiji remained lying there and listened, unconcerned to their criticism. But later, when they went to extremes, he lost his patience, sat up, and started arguing the issue with them. He said, "What do you say? Instead of ruining India, the sannyasins have kept it alive. Just think for a moment how great were Buddha, Shankara, Chaitanya, and others. Think what they did for India." In this way, Swamiji proved from history that it is the monks who have kept India alive. He answered these people's arguments so beautifully that they were very much surprised. The foremost of the critics was so pleased with Swamiji's flawless English and scholarly arguments that he invited him to his place. Of course, Swamiji could not accept his invitation at the time because he was proceeding to Limdi as the guest of the Thakur Sahib, who had great regard for him. Once Swamiji stopped in Pune too. After a while, a monk asked, "Maharaj, who gave you the name Mahapurush?" "Swami, it was Swamiji who started calling me Mahapurush." Monk, "Why? Was there a special reason for it?" Swami, "Yes, there was. In those days we used to visit the master. I frequently had to go home because I had been married. It was distasteful to me. Somehow or other I would spend the night at home, repeating the name of the Lord. My wife was very unhappy and would cry. I spoke about it to the master and prayed that my worldly bondage be destroyed. After hearing my story, the master asked me to perform a certain ritual and said in a tone of assurance, 'Have no fear, I am here to protect you. Think of me and perform this ritual. Nothing adverse will happen to you. I am telling you that even if you sleep in this same room with your wife, you will be free from danger. You will see it will rather intensify your spirit of renunciation.' The master prescribed the same ritual for Swami Brahmananda. I went through the ritual as instructed and didn't have any trouble. In the course of conversation, I once mentioned this incident to Swamiji. He was very much surprised and remarked, 'What do you say? It is the characteristic of a Mahapurusha, great soul. You are certainly one.' After that, he started calling me by this name, and others did the same. Previously, Swamiji used to call me Tarakta. One day at Balaram Babu's house, as Swamiji called me Mahapurusha, Swami Premananda's mother remarked, "What did you say? Is not a Mahapurush one who lives in a tree?" She meant a monkey. "What kind of Mahapurush is he?" Swamiji explained that I was a genuine Mahapurush, a great soul. It pleased her very much. To kill a monkey. Okay. Now we're going to skip, he goes back to Belur chapter 13. Belur Monastery, time June 1927. It was afternoon. Swami Shivananda was standing downstairs on the eastern veranda of the Belur Monastery. On the front lawn with some young men belonging to a gymnastic club of Calcutta were displaying feats of physical strength and skill. The Swami was watching the performance with great enthusiasm and interest, as were the sadhus and devotees of the monastery. The Swami asked a monk to go and get some sweets for the young men from the stores. Commending one boy's performance of muscle control, he remarked, "Ah, this boy did very well. Bravo, my child. Go ahead. Practice of continence is essential even for these physical feats. Whatever line of work a person may undertake, the secret of success is continence. It is the lack of continence that accounts for the degeneration of our country." After entertaining the boys with sweets and prasad, the Swami went upstairs. Highly pleased with the various displays, he said to some monks of the order who were close by, "I hope you all take physical exercise." Two among them replied in the affirmative. The Swami remarked again, "One must have regular physical exercise every day. Our scriptures say, a good physique is the first requisite of spirituality. For spiritual advancement, one must first make the body strong. A sound mind in a sound body. Don't you see how strong the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna were? Swami Vivekananda, Brahmananda, Niranjananda, Sardananda, and others were all very good athletes. Swamiji and Swami Brahmananda had actual training in wrestling from an expert. Among us, only Swamis Yogananda and Premananda were not very strong physically. How can one stand the strain of austerities and spiritual disciplines without a good physique? You are young. You should take regular physical exercise. You do not have to be champion athletes, but you should exercise for good health. It is not enough if one becomes a monk. The Upanishads say an aspirant should be youthful, energetic, good-natured, studious, and efficient. If one has these qualities, one may aspire after the knowledge of Brahman. Swamiji used to say, a feeble-bodied person with no fire and mettle can hardly make any spiritual progress. It is too true. When one is sick, so much time is spent treating and nursing the body. How will there be time for meditation, devotion, study, and work? Besides, unless the body is sufficiently strong, it would not be able to stand the reaction of a deep spiritual experience. A mental derangement or a total physical breakdown may occur. Further, my children, you monks are the soldiers of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. You have so much to do in this world. Swamiji liked young men with good physiques. He himself, because of his splendid and robust health, was able to stir up the world in a short time. After a while, Mahapurushji went downstairs. Walking to the southeastern part of the monastery grounds, he stood at a certain place, affectionately patting the cows that were grazing there. By the orders of the Swami, the cows were having a treat of molasses and barley flour. When he saw their joy, his happiness knew no bounds. Later, he began strolling on the grounds, accompanied by some devotees. Addressing them, he said, "All must accept the message of the Master and Swamiji. Swamiji was born to preach the Master's ideas of peace and harmony. You will see how in course of time the Western countries will take to these ideas. This is just the beginning, the prelude. The Western people are intellectual and are bound to accept the broad universal principles of the Master's teaching, which alone can establish peace in this world. In different countries, many people are being influenced by the ideals as lived by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, and are giving them out with the stamp of their own. Let them do as they please. Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji never cared for name or fame. They came for the good of the world, so long as that purpose is served and their teachings are spread, they are satisfied. Don't you know it is very hard to digest fame? Those who do not have self-realization can hardly rise above the desire for name and fame. How many avatars are cropping up these days? After acquiring a little devotion or spiritual fervor, people declare themselves to be avatars in no time. Well, there it ends. Because of egotism and pride, they cannot make any progress. On the contrary, they lose what they have acquired. I think we'll stop there this evening, and if there are any questions or comments, jump in now.
I have a question or comment. Dispassion, is that basically detachment?
I'm sorry, compassion?
Dispassion.
Dispassion. Dispassion is, in my mind, discrimination, and it comes out of discrimination in Viveka. Looking at everything, you have a certain distance from, or a certain non-attachment to things in the world. It isn't a lack of passion, because you need that kind of oomph to get anywhere in spiritual life. But you need to direct it towards God. So you develop a certain amount of dispassion for the things of the world. Does that make sense? You can.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I had said at one time, I think we were going to do the lives of the direct disciples, and it looks like what we're doing. We've done Swami Brahmananda, the first president of the Ramakrishna order. We're doing Swami Shivananda, the second president of the Ramakrishna order, and a direct disciple. So we only have one other direct disciple who was the president of the order, and that's Swami Vigyananda. Oh, Akhandananda was president. Okay, was he before Vigyananda? Okay, so we'll do Akhandananda next, and then Vigyananda, and then we'll go on to the others. Because it seems we haven't really read all these books about the direct disciples, and sometimes the names get confusing in the gospel. Okay, any other questions? It's good to see you all. I hope you're all staying well. And we'll see you next. Oh, okay. This evening is Sunday Puja from 7:44 p.m. to 8:32 p.m. when we chant Jai Sri Durga. For that precise time, we're going to do it through Zoom and YouTube, I believe, here in the temple. So that's this evening. Saturday will be Swami Satyamayananda's class on the Katha at 5. And then Swami Satyamayananda will give the talk Sunday on Samadhi, conquest of life and death. So that's our program for the rest of this week. Okay. We'll end with the chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Panamastu.